Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. I was not originally going to make a video this week, but I was very excited to see that one of my local theaters this week was doing a few showings of The Damned, which is a movie that I wanted to see last week, but none of the theaters were showing it. Finally, one of the AMCs in the area got it, so I ran out to do a showing and wanted to come on here and just give a quick review of it. This is a movie that I really wanted to see. I knew going into it that it was a folk horror film. Folk horror is one of my favorite subgenres, and it's a film that takes place on this island, and it's about this young woman who owns this fishing cabin where these fishermen come during the winter and they fish on the oceans to get food, and then they bring it back to their families and loved ones in the springtime. And while on this island and stuck in these very cold, snowy conditions, there's this evil entity that comes into these people's lives. What ends up happening is one day, while the team is getting ready to go out on one of their excursions, they see another boat of fishermen out in the distance. They've crashed their boat against one of the rocks and their ship is sinking. And they have a moment of okay, do we go out and save these people? And the young woman, who's played by Odessa Young, is like, no, it's too dangerous. We need to stay here. There's an older woman on the island with them that's helping out. A couple of the bodies wash up on shore and she's like, you're not burying them properly. These are people that are died due to misfortunes, and if you don't bury them properly, then all of their anger and grief and rage is going to coalesce in this entity, which is referred to in the film as the Drago, the dragon, Dragon. Something like that. Odessa Young's character and the fishermen are just kind of yeah, whatever, lady. They don't really believe in any of the witchcraft stuff. And then, of course, things go to hell from there. There's a lot of other stuff that happens in between all of these moments, but I don't want to give spoilers for this movie. I'll say up front, I enjoyed probably 98% of this film. And I'll talk about the 1% that didn't quite hit for me. But overall, I really enjoyed this film. I don't necessarily think this is one you have to run out to a theater to see. I mean, I feel kind of bad saying that because the cinematography in this movie is gorgeous. There is so many beautiful shots throughout this film. So many sequences, right? Long shots of these wintry landscapes. You have scenes in which characters are going out into the darkness and they just have the one lantern that's just glowing that orange light in the darkness, and everything's framed in shadows, and it looks so beautiful. There were so many times in the theater where I was looking at the imagery and was just yes, gorgeous, love it. So if you're someone that's really into films that have the folkloric aspect but also these gorgeous cinematography and very gorgeous aesthetics, I think this is a film that you would really enjoy. This very much felt like something in the vein of a Robert Eggers movie, for example, something along the lines of The Witch. I did see someone online that referred to this movie as Timu Robert Eggers. I don't think I would go that far, but it does have that similar feel and vibes, and just really immersing you in the historical aspect. There were a couple of scenes where you're just hanging with the characters in their cabin that's made of stone, and they have the crackling fireplace and they're sitting around drinking and they're just singing these old fisherman songs, and those are the scenes that I actually loved the most. I love when these kinds of folk horror films can really immerse us within the time period that it's taking place, and yes, bringing in all of the mystical beliefs, bringing all the religious beliefs here. There was a lot about this particular culture that I didn't know going into the film, so I always love when I can learn something about the culture as well. So if you're into those kinds of movies, I would say definitely check this one out. I do think this is more of a slow burn horror film, and I'll say I think it's more interested in bringing you into this environment and creating this atmosphere and creating just the sense of dread where you're always kind of questioning what's going on, rather than really showing you scenes of horror and gore. It's a short film. It's only 90 minutes, I think, or maybe 85 minutes, so you're in and out very quickly, which I think is nice, and I think it works for what this kind of film is doing, right? This is really more of a psychological exploration of these characters. There are a few scenes of gore here and there. There's particularly one scene in which they have to cut someone's stomach open that I was just Oh, that was pretty gnarly. That's probably like the gnarliest that it got. If you're someone that goes into the horror films for the gore, this one's not going to give you that much of it. I could see this being a film in which some people really love it and just really love like the vibes and the universe that it's creating for you. I could see some people considering this like a kind of comfort horror film, right? Because again, it's not that abrasive and it does feel very cozy. Again, you're in these intimate scenes with these characters and everyone's like all like bundled up together because it's so cold. And yes, it is very slow. It's more focused on the quiet moments. So I could see some people enjoying this for that aspect of it. For others, I could see them watching this film and being like, nothing happened here. So it's going to be a toss-up of how people react to this, and your reaction to it is really going to depend on your taste in horror films, I feel. I do think it builds dread very well, and what I did like about this film is when the demon starts infecting everyone in this cabin, the filmmaker is allowing the entity to just be in the space with the characters, right? It's like a character looks over at a corner and suddenly there's a shadowy figure that's like crouched down, and it just shows us the demon without having to do that like annoying jump scare zinger that we've come to expect in these kinds of films. So just these very quiet moments where it's like the demon is just like creeping up behind someone, or you have Odessa Young's character that's sleeping in a bed and the camera like pans down and you just see this like decaying hand like going on top of her, and those moments are like really eerie. For some reason it just feels so much more threatening, I guess, because if a demon was coming after you in real life, it's highly unlikely it would be presenting itself with a very loud noise to let you know of its presence, right? It would be this thing that just kind of like sneaks up on you. So I really enjoyed that the filmmakers allowed letting us be with like Odessa's Young character and just having to like sit with this entity and see it, and just kind of having these seconds going by of like, okay, what is going to happen here? What the hell is this thing going to do? What is odd about the movie is that while it doesn't use those like loud zingers when the monster shows up, it's not completely free of jump scares. There are like moments here and there where the scene will like cut to something and suddenly the sound just gets so much louder. But those aren't even really like jump scares. They're just kind of like these odd transition scenes. Like I remember there was one moment where, I think it was a moment where we're with her in the room and the demon's there, or she's having like a nightmare of some kind, and then the scene cuts to the next morning and there's like a fisherman outside and he's like breaking ice in this like container of water, and for some reason him breaking the ice was like so loud compared to what we had just seen in the previous scene, and that made me jump. That's one of my biggest critiques of the film, is that I don't know why it felt like it needed to have these like moments of like really loud noises that felt like jump scares but weren't jump scares usually. It just felt kind of out of place with the rest of the film, especially since anytime the horror happens, like it gets so quiet. At one point the old woman tells Odessa Young's character, oh, the only way to kill the demon is with fire. And then after that there's like random scenes where the film will cut to just images of fire. But they're so loud. It was like, was that necessary? Was that necessary? I don't think it was. But other than those kind of annoying moments, I did think that, as I said, I feel like the atmosphere in this film is like 10 out of 10. There's like a scene where you have the characters and they're trying to like go find where this monster is hiding, and they're climbing up these rocks and everything gets all like foggy, and so you're just following these like shadowy figures in the fog and you're never like quite sure if something is going to pop up or not. And I think it's a really great film for this time of year because it just feels cold, and there's snow on the ground and the wind is howling, and again the color scheme of it using all these different shades of blue, and I think it definitely does tap into the cabin fever that one can get during this time of year, and just like what that can do to your mind as well. This is nothing new. We've seen this being played out before in horror films. It's like the cabin fever, the depression of winter can manifest into different kinds of anxieties. And so this is definitely a film that's playing on that wavelength as well. As I said, you are having themes here around whether or not any of this is really happening, right? This is another one of those films that, is there a demonic entity, or is this all in the characters' minds, right? Are the characters just driving themselves crazy? And again, that's nothing new. I think the strength of this film is in the visuals and the environment that it is creating. I know from looking online, some people felt the stakes weren't that high. There's always this threat of hunger and running out of food. For me, I didn't really feel like I needed like those scenes of characters doubling over from like hunger pains. The threat that hangs over these characters, the threat of that, the threat that if they don't find food soon, then that is where they're gonna go, right? They are going to be suffering and in pain and probably dying. I think the threat of that is enough to make them get a little crazy, right? And to make them like jump to these very illogical conclusions about each other, about this entity that they think is haunting them. So I do like that the film explored their psychology within that realm. And one of my other favorite parts about this movie is Odessa Young's character. I think she was great throughout the film. I really enjoyed following her. And what I really liked about the character too that felt very refreshing is I feel like, especially in these kind of American folk horror films that we've been getting over the past however many 10 years now, usually what you have is a female protagonist that is brought into this situation where bad things are happening. And a lot of times what you see happen is that whatever monstrous force is present, usually that has some sort of connection to the female herself, whether that's being somewhat related to female sexuality or just the female psychology. And oftentimes you're having the situation in which you have a woman character that is stuck between these two oppressive forces. I just talked about this with Robert Eggers' Nosferatu film, right? Where you have the monster, which is this oppressive male entity, and there's usually some other figure in the female protagonist's life, whether it's a father figure or a boyfriend or a husband. There's also an oppressive force in the character's life. And they're kind of stuck between having to choose one or the other, or really having no choice but to accept the darkness into their life, right? So they're really kind of choosing one oppressive force for another. Whereas with this film, I really enjoyed that you had a female protagonist that was very strong and active, and you didn't feel that same kind of heaviness that you have with these other films, right? It wasn't necessarily like the demon having anything to do with like her sexuality or even her being a woman. The demon definitely connected to the choices that she chooses to make throughout the film, but not specifically being brought about because of the fact that she's a woman. That makes sense. Whereas if you think of something like The Witch, you can definitely see that in the female protagonist of that film, right? That the family is blaming her for this evil entity that is affecting all of them, and that has a lot to do with the fact that she's becoming a woman and she's like disobeying her father and she's not being a good daughter. So I liked that we had a female protagonist that didn't have that baggage, even though she is a woman that's in a very male-centric environment. It was just nice, and maybe some people would say this is unrealistic, but I just liked that she was like coming in and like telling these guys what to do and being like, you know, you're on my land, you're in my fishing cabin, like you're gonna do what I tell you to do. I liked that. I liked that she was a very active character and very much being like, okay, there's some evil entity out there, well, I'm gonna go out and find it. I'm gonna go out and kill this thing. All that being said, I do think there could have been a bit of a stronger like reflection between what this demon is and what our protagonist is feeling throughout the movie. Like you can definitely tell that she's feeling guilt about her decisions, and I think this is a demon that definitely feeds off of those kinds of negative emotions. But what you also find out at the very beginning of the film is that her husband passed away in the previous year, and what wasn't clear to me is, did she have a hand in his demise? Because again, she's very much the one making the decisions for the men, like whether or not they go out to fish or whether they stay behind. So I was kind of curious, and maybe they did establish this and I just missed it, whether or not she might have had a hand in her husband dying. Like, was it a thing of she told him to go out on the water when maybe she shouldn't have, and that's how she lost him? And so it's like her grief and guilt over that is manifesting in her continuing to make these bad choices, which then this demon entity is feeding off of. It kind of felt like that's where it was going. I just wish they had made that like connection a little bit more clear. So there are a few things here and there, like narrative wise, or again, the use of the unnecessary jump scares that weren't my favorite, but for the most part, I was staying with the film. I was like, okay, I'm enjoying this for what it is. And then the part that it fell apart for me a little bit, which is such a bummer to say, is right at the ending. I mean, like literally like the last like 5 minutes. And here's what I'll say. Like, I don't think it was completely like an atrocious ending and like, oh my god, it ruined the whole rest of the movie. I don't think that's what it is. I think the issue here is that the ending comes very quick and is very abrupt. It's definitely an ambiguous ending, which is okay. You can have an ambiguous ending. I think there was just something off in the pacing about it. It felt like it needed like another like beat of her kind of having some sort of emotional moment, like where we can kind of understand like what she's thinking at the end of this and how everything is wrapping up. There was just something about it that felt a little off. And again, I don't want to get into spoilers here, but I do want to talk about the ending. So if you haven't seen the film yet and you don't want to be spoiled, skip to this timestamp right here. I want to talk about the ending for like a couple minutes, so just skip ahead if you don't want to get spoiled. So for those of you who have seen this movie, what was your interpretation of the ending? I had like two thoughts, right? So the ending happens, this guy shows up and he tells her, I'm one of the sailors from the shipwreck. It was me that stole all of your food. I've been hiding here the whole time. And at first I was like, oh, okay, that's like what was going on here. So again, very much playing with these themes around all of this was just in these characters' minds and they just drove themselves crazy. But then when I was leaving the theater and I was thinking about it, I was like, well, it's kind of odd because when he shows up, like he doesn't look like a guy that was just involved in a shipwreck. Like if you think about the guys that we do see earlier in the film compared to him, like he looked pretty like clean. He just didn't look like someone that had been like hiding out in the middle of winter and just trying to survive, right? And the fact that he does give her the watch, and the film had set up earlier that that watch was not working. And also we do know that this demon entity can be a shapeshifter. So then I was like, well, maybe it was just the demonic entity and she saw that and then killed it. Again, there was just something off in like the setup of it, I feel, that didn't quite click for me. Okay, we're done with the spoiler talk. The ending wasn't my favorite. I don't think it's enough to negate everything else that the film offers. Again, I think this is just like a good one where if it's streaming, you can curl up on the couch, get some popcorn, put it on a really cold, snowy day. And yeah, I had fun with it for what it is. As far as like January horror films go, this is definitely one of the best that I've ever seen. And it is nice to be able to start the year with something that you can tell it does have an artistic vision. So those are my thoughts on The Damned. If you have seen this movie, let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. And I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.